The diner smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. The kind of small-town spot where the booths were cracked with years of wear, but always clean. The jukebox in the corner still flashing neon, even though no one had touched it in years. Morning sunlight streamed in through the blinds, casting golden stripes across checkered floors that had seen thousands of footsteps. It was one of those places where everyone knew each other, or thought they did. On this particular Saturday, the crowd was lively, families grabbing breakfast after soccer games, older couples lingering over pancakes, and a group of teens that had taken over the booth near the center. Their voices carried across the room, loud, sharp, dripping with arrogance. At the counter, a girl named Maya sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she waited for her hot chocolate. She looked about 16, petite, with dark hair tied back in a ponytail. She wore a light pink hoodie and jeans, nothing flashy. But what made her stand out wasn't her clothes, it was the fact that she walked with braces on her legs and leaned heavily on her crutches to anyone with compassion. Maya's presence was inspiring. She had a warm smile, even when she struggled to move, and her eyes carried a spark of quiet resilience. But to the group of teens in the booth, she was a target. "Hey, look," one of them whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. His name was Chad, the self-proclaimed leader of the pack. He had that smug, entitled air that came from being spoiled all his life designer sneakers, a gold chain dangling over his shirt, and a laugh that sounded more like mockery than joy. "Crutches. Did someone forget to bring the pity balloons?" His friends laughed. Samantha, the queen bee of the group, flipped her blonde hair and added, "Oh my God, she looks like she's about to topple over." "Careful, sweetheart. This floor is slippery." Her voice dripped with fake concern. Maya froze. She heard every word, though she kept her gaze down on the counter. She clenched her hands together tighter, telling herself to stay calm. She'd been through this before: stares, whispers, cruel laughter, but it never stopped stinging. The waitress, Evelyn, an older woman with a kind face, placed the hot chocolate in front of Maya. She leaned in slightly, whispering so only Maya could hear, "Don't mind them, sweetheart. Some people never learn manners." Maya forced a small smile. "Thank you." But the teens weren't done. Chad rose from the booth, strutting toward the counter like he owned the place. His sneakers squeaked against the floor, announcing his arrogance with every step. "Hey," said, leaning on the counter right beside Maya, invading her space. "So, what happened? Fall down the stairs? Or maybe you just wanted extra attention?" His friend snickered in the background. Maya shifted uncomfortably, trying to scoot her stool away. "Please, just leave me alone." Chad smirked. "Ah, come on, don't be like that. I'm just curious. I mean, it's not every day we see someone like you out here. Takes guts, I'll give you that." He leaned closer, lowering his voice, but keeping the cruelty sharp. "But honestly, maybe you should just stay home. You're kind of ruining the vibe." The diner grew quiet. People heard, but no one spoke up. Some averted their eyes, others shook their heads, but stayed in their seats. That silence cut deeper than the words. Maya's chest tightened. She gripped her crutches. "I just want to drink my hot chocolate in peace." Chad straightened and laughed, loud and cruel. "Hear that, guys? Hot chocolate. She's what, 5 years old?" Samantha and the others howled with laughter, and then it happened. As Maya tried to get off the stool, Chad reached out and shoved one of her crutches, making her stumble. She tried to catch herself, but her legs couldn't support the sudden shift. She toppled forward, hitting the floor hard. Gasps filled the diner. Maya winced, pain shooting through her knees. Her hot chocolate spilled, dark liquid spreading across the tiles. She pushed herself up slowly, embarrassed tears forming in her eyes. Chad crouched beside her, grinning. "Oops. Guess I slipped. You okay down there?" He reached out and, without warning, tapped her cheek lightly, then smacked it harder with the back of his hand. It wasn't a brutal slap, but it was cruel, humiliating, intentional. The diner erupted. Some people gasped. A father at a booth muttered, "Unbelievable," but didn't move. Evelyn stormed forward, her hands shaking. "Chad, that's enough." She snapped, her voice trembling with outrage. "You sit down right now before I call your parents." Chad just laughed and walked back to his booth, high-fiving his friends like he'd just scored a victory. "Relax, Evie. We're just having a little fun." Maya sat there, humiliated, tears sliding down her cheeks as she tried to gather her crutches. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't fit them under her arms. The whole diner watched. Some whispered, some frowned, but no one came to help. Evelyn bent down, helping her up gently. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. You don't deserve this." "Not one bit," Maya sniffled, whispering, "It's okay. I'm used to it." That sentence hit Evelyn like a punch in the chest. "I used to it." The thought that this young girl had grown accustomed to cruelty broke her heart. But Chad and his friends weren't done. Back at their booth, Samantha pulled out her phone. "You guys, this is gold. I got the whole thing on video." Chad smirked. "Post it. Hashtag Cripple Chronicles. People are going to eat this up." Laughter. Cruel, echoing laughter. And still, no one stepped in. Maya sat back at the counter. Staring down at the ruined hot chocolate, Evelyn was already mopping up. Her cheeks were red from embarrassment, but her eyes held something deeper. Pain, yes, but also dignity. She refused to break in front of them, even if it tore her apart inside. Minutes ticked by. Chad and his group went back to their loud chatter, bragging, mocking, filling the diner with their toxic energy. The rest of the customers sat in uncomfortable silence, sneaking guilty glances toward Maya, but none brave enough to confront the teens. And then, the bell above the diner door jingled. Everyone turned their heads. A group of 6 men walked in, their heavy boots thudding against the floor. They wore leather vests with patches, chains on their belts, tattoos on their arms. Their presence filled the room instantly. They weren't just customers, they were a force. The kind of men who carried an aura that made you straighten in your seat without realizing it. The lead man, tall with a thick beard and piercing eyes, scanned the room as though he could read every soul inside. His gaze lingered for a moment on Maya, still holding her crutches, her face flushed from humiliation. Then, his eyes shifted toward Chad's booth. The diner went silent. Nobody knew it yet. The moment those bikers walked in, the story had changed. And Chad had no idea his world was about to turn upside down. The diner, once buzzing with casual chatter, now carried a different energy. The presence of the bikers shifted the atmosphere. Their boots clanked against the checkered tiles as they moved toward an empty table near the back. The heavy leather of their jackets creaked with each step, patches stitched with names like Iron Brotherhood glinting in the sunlight. They didn't need to speak to command respect, their silence alone did it. Chad glanced up, smirked, then leaned toward Samantha. "Look at this." Dinosaurs rolled in. "What is this? Sons of Anarchy? Senior edition?" He laughed loud enough for the whole diner to hear. His friends chuckled nervously. Even Samantha, though she snickered, kept darting uneasy glances at the bikers. There was something about them, something untamed, that unsettled her. The bearded leader sat down, stretching his broad shoulders. He caught Evelyn's eye and gave her a polite nod. She forced a smile and moved quickly to bring menus, but inside, her heart pounded. She'd served all kinds of folks in her years at the diner. But these men had an energy that was different, not threatening, but commanding. Maya noticed them too. She sat stiffly at the counter, clutching her crutches like they were lifelines. A part of her hoped desperately that maybe they had seen what happened. But another part, the cautious part, whispered not to get her hopes up. People didn't step in. People watched. People filmed. She'd learned that the hard way. Chad, feeling the weight of the silence, decided to push further. He thrived on attention, and when the bikers didn't react to his mockery, he grew restless. "Hey, cripple," he called across the diner, his voice slicing through the stillness. Conversations hushed. "You still crying over your spilled cocoa? Maybe you should ask these guys for a ride on their tricycles. Bet they've got training wheels just for you." His friends laughed, slapping the table. Maya's throat tightened. She turned slightly, her eyes locking on Evelyn for comfort, but Evelyn was busy refilling coffee at a nearby booth. Alone, she whispered under her breath, "Please, just stop." But Chad wasn't about to stop. He stood again, swaggering across the room. His sneakers squeaked with each arrogant step, like a drumbeat of malice. He planted himself in front of Maya, towering over her. "Stand up," he demanded. Maya's voice shook. "Why?" Chad sneered. "Because I said so. Come on. Show us how fast those legs can move. Or can't." Her chest rose and fell quickly. Fear clawed at her ribs, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I'm not doing this." The diner felt frozen, all eyes glued to the scene. A mother with 2 children at a nearby booth whispered urgently to her husband, "Do something." But he only shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "We don't want trouble." Chad chuckled. "Not doing it? Fine." In a sudden motion, he yanked one of her crutches out of her hands. Maya gasped, nearly toppling again. He held the crutch up like a trophy, spinning it. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold Excalibur." His friends howled with laughter, pounding the table. Samantha pulled out her phone again, recording gleefully. Maya reached out, panic in her eyes. "Please, give it back." Chad waved it just out of reach. "What's the magic word?" Her voice cracked. "Please." "Wrong." He smirked and tossed the crutch across the floor. It clattered loudly against the tiles. Sliding beneath another booth, tears welled in Maya's eyes as she struggled to balance with her remaining crutch. Her body shook with the effort, but she refused to fall. Not again. She clenched her jaw, willing herself to stay upright even as humiliation burned her cheeks. The bikers at the back table hadn't moved. Not yet, but their eyes were locked on the scene, their jaws tight. The leader's fingers tapped slowly on the table like a ticking clock. "Come on," Chad taunted, leaning closer. "Pick it up, or are you too slow?" Finally, Evelyn snapped. She stormed over, her hands shaking with fury. "Enough." "Chad, sit down before she could finish." Chad waved her off. "Relax, Grandma. I'm just teaching her a life lesson. The world's tough. Might as well toughen up now." Evelyn's voice cracked with rage. "You call this a life lesson? Humiliating a young girl? Stealing her crutches?" Chad smirked. "If she can't handle this, how's she going to handle the real world?" Maya lowered her head, tears dripping onto the counter. The world blurred, her humiliation suffocating. But through her tears, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "The world isn't cruel. People are," the words, though quiet, carried. The diner hushed again. For a moment, even Chad faltered, his smirk twitching. But only for a moment. He shrugged and laughed. "Whatever. Cry it out, cripple." Then, with a swift motion, he slapped her drink off the counter. The glass shattered on the floor, milk and chocolate spreading like a stain of shame. Gasps. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the diner. That was it. The bearded biker at the back stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made everyone flinch. His broad frame loomed as he took deliberate steps forward, each boot striking like a warning bell. His brothers rose with him, their movements synchronized, their faces hard as stone. Chad turned, startled for the first time. He forced a laugh. "What? You guys got a problem?" The leader stopped a few feet away, towering over Chad. His voice was low, gravelly, steady. "Yeah, we got a problem." The diner went dead silent. Maya looked up, her tear-streaked face reflecting a flicker of hope she hadn't dared to feel all morning. Evelyn's shoulders relaxed slightly, as though the weight of helplessness had been lifted. Chad straightened, puffing his chest. "What? You gonna fight me? You old guys think you're tough?" The leader didn't flinch. He leaned slightly, his piercing eyes locked on Chad's son. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Chad swallowed, his cocky facade cracking for a split second. But then Samantha called out nervously from the booth, "Chad, let's just sit down." But Chad couldn't back down. His pride wouldn't let him. He sneered. The leader smiled faintly, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that made your blood run cold. He turned his head toward Maya, softening. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "you okay?" Maya hesitated, then nodded faintly, though her eyes brimmed with fresh tears. I'm fine." "No," Evelyn interjected, her voice trembling. She's not fine. She's been tormented this entire morning. And everyone, her voice broke as she glanced around the diner. Everyone just sat here. Guilt spread across the faces of the bystanders. The mother who had whispered to her husband lowered her eyes in shame. The father clenched his jaw. A young man at another booth looked down at his phone, shamed he hadn't spoken up. The leader's gaze swept the diner, then settled back on Chad. His tone darkened. You think picking on someone smaller makes you a man? He took a slow step closer, his boots heavy on the tiles. Let me tell you something. Real men protect. They don't destroy. Chad's bravado wavered. He laughed nervously. You don't know me. The leader leaned in so close Chad could see the steel in his eyes. I know enough. Behind him, the other bikers stood firm, silent pillars of support. Their very presence screamed loyalty, strength, and justice. For the first time that morning, the balance of power had shifted. Maya felt it. The entire diner felt it, but the storm wasn't over. Not yet. The tension had only just reached its breaking point, because in the next hour, everything would unravel. Truths would be revealed. And Chad's mug, arrogant Chad, would finally learn what it meant to regret. The diner's air was thick with tension, as if even the dust motes hanging in the sunlight knew something was about to explode. Chad stood frozen, his bravado thinning, his smirk faltering. The bikers loomed, an immovable wall of leather and steel. The leader, still inches from Chad, spoke with a voice that was calm but carried the weight of thunder. Pick up her crutch. Chad blinked. What? You heard me, the man growled, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. Pick it up. Hand it back to her. The entire diner held its breath. Chad glanced nervously toward his friends. Samantha shifted uncomfortably in the booth, muttering, Chad, just do it. But his pride, that gnawing beast inside him, wouldn't let go. He forced a laugh, trying to mask the crack in his confidence. You think you can boss me around? You're just some old biker. What? You think people respect you just because you wear leather and chains? He puffed out his chest, his voice shaking just slightly. I don't take orders from anyone. The leader's eyes narrowed. He leaned in close enough that Chad could see the faint scar that ran down his cheek. The mark of battles fought long before this day. Then maybe you'll take orders from her. He turned to Maya. The girl still clutched her single crutch, her small frame trembling. But her eyes widened when the biker addressed her directly. Sweetheart, the man said gently, his voice softening. Tell him what you want. Maya's lips parted. She looked at Chat's boy who had mocked her, humiliated her, slapped her. She saw the cracks in his smirk now, the fear simmering beneath his arrogance. For the first time that morning, she wasn't the one shrinking. Her voice was quiet but steady. Give me back my crutch. The diner fell into absolute silence. Chad's face burned red, anger and shame warring inside him. He spat on the ground. Fine. He stalked toward the booth, dropped to his knees, and dragged the crutch out from beneath the table. He stood and shoved it toward Maya with a sneer. Happy now? Maya took it, her hands trembling, but she stood taller once she had both crutches again. The weight of dignity settled back on her shoulders. The leader's eyes stayed locked on Chad. Now apologize. Chad's nostrils flared. What? No way? The biker took a step closer. The floorboard seemed to tremble beneath his boots. Apologize. Chad glanced wildly around the diner, but no one was on his side anymore. The laughter from his friends had died long ago. Samantha lowered her phone, shame flickering across her face. The bystanders who had once turned away were now staring directly at him, their eyes condemning. His voice cracked as he muttered, Sorry. Louder, the biker growled. Chad's jaw clenched. His fists balled. Finally, with a voice that trembled between rage and humiliation, he shouted, I'm sorry. The sound echoed through the diner. For Maya. The words weren't enough to erase the pain, but they were a crack in the armor of cruelty. She looked at Chad, her eyes glistening, and whispered, You should be. The leader straightened, satisfied. But then he did something no one expected. He turned back to Maya, and with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his intimidating frame, he said, Sweetheart, you're braver than most people in this room. You stood tall when everyone else stayed silent. Don't ever forget that. Her lips trembled into the faintest smile. Chad scoffed. Whatever. This is stupid. Let's get out of here, he gestured to his friends. But when he turned, he froze. The other bikers had surrounded the booth. Their leather vests loomed like shadows. One of them, a tall man with a tattoo of an eagle on his forearm, crossed his arms and said, "Sit down. We're not finished." Chad's bravado cracked completely. His voice pitched higher. "What is this? You can't keep me here." The leader chuckled darkly. "We're not keeping you. We're teaching you." And then the truth came. Evelyn, who had been standing nearby, gasped as she suddenly recognized the patch on the leader's vest. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Wait a second. Aren't you Captain Briggs?" The diner erupted in murmurs. The leader nodded calmly. "Retired. But once a cop, always a cop." His piercing gaze fell back on Chad. "And I still have plenty of friends in law enforcement. You think bullying's a joke? You think hitting someone weaker makes you tough? Keep it up, and you'll find out what jail food tastes like." Chad's face drained of color. "You're lying." But Evelyn shook her head. "He's not lying. I remember the stories. This man dismantled half the gangs in this county before you were even born." The bikers exchanged knowing smiles. This wasn't just a group of rough riders. They were veterans, ex-cops, and protectors. They weren't here for trouble. They were here for justice. The weight of realization sank into Chad. His friends shifted uncomfortably, guilt eating away at them. Samantha slid her phone into her bag, unable to meet Maya's eyes. The leader stepped closer, his voice now low and deliberate. "Son, life has a way of humbling people. You can either learn it now or learn it the hard way." Chad swallowed hard. His arrogance was gone. He looked small, a boy caught in the wreckage of his own cruelty. The leader turned to Maya once more. "You've got more strength than he'll ever understand. Don't let anyone take that from you." Maya nodded, her tears finally breaking into a smile of relief. For the first time that morning, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, protected. The biker slowly stepped back, giving the room its breath again. Chad slumped into his booth, humiliated. His friends avoiding his gaze. Evelyn placed a fresh cup of hot chocolate in front of Maya, her voice soft. "On the house, sweetheart," Maya whispered. "Thank you." The leader gave a final nod to Evelyn and to Maya, then motioned to his brothers. They moved toward the door, their boots heavy, their presence lingering even after the bell above the door jingled behind them. The diner slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, though quieter, more thoughtful. People exchanged guilty glances, realizing their silence had made them complicit. A father finally leaned across his booth and told his kids, "You see what happened today? That's why you never, ever stay quiet when someone's being hurt." Maya sipped her hot chocolate, warmth spreading through her chest. She had been broken down, humiliated. But in the end, justice had walked in. And Chad. He sat in silence, staring at his reflection in the greasy tabletop, his mind echoing with the words he'd been forced to hear. Real men protect. They don't destroy. This story reminds us that true strength is not found in hurting others, but in protecting them. We never know the battles someone else is fighting, and our silence can wound as deeply as cruelty. But kindness, courage, and standing up for what's right, that's what changes lives. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those who endure. And never judge someone by their struggles, because they may be stronger than you could ever imagine.